Tonight, we are pleased to introduce to you Tony Rinaudo, who received his bachelor's degree, Rural Science University of New England, Australia, and agronomy through the University of Armidale, as well as attending the Bible College of New Zealand. Rinaudo is known for putting forward a deforestation management plan practice known as farmer-managed natural regeneration, FMNR. He has worked as the Principal Natural Resources Advisor for World Vision Australia and is currently the Senior Climate Action Advisor. Rinaudo is recognized for both his environmental and humanitarian approaches for global initiatives. Rinaudo was the 2018 laureate of the Right Livelihood Award and bestowed the Member of the Order of Australia. Rinaudo, the alternative Nobel winner, was portrayed in a documentary, Forest Maker. Australians Institute for the Study of Christianity in an Age of Science and Technology published his autobiography entitled The Forest Underground, Hope for a Planet in Crisis. Before we begin, we'll say the traditional land treaty acknowledgements. The afforestation areas are situated in the West Swale, Yorath Island Glacial Spillway, a sacred site in Treaty 6 territory and homeland of the Métis. Those who entered into Treaty 6 are the Nahiawak, Cree, Nakaway, Saulteaux, and the Yankton and Yanktonai Nakota people. May our relationships with the land, standing peoples, forests, and waters teach us to honor and respect the past and invite us to move forward in harmony. May we all come together as friends to find inspiration and guidance from histories, languages, and cultures which broaden our understanding and community collaboration for the present and the future. And now, without further ado, we are once again proud to present Tony Rinaudo and the farmer-managed natural regeneration approach. Thank you very much for being with us tonight.
Hello, everybody. It's a great pleasure for me to be sharing with you. I think it's evening in Saskatoon. And thank you to Julia for organizing this webinar. I grew up in a very beautiful part of Australia. And as a child, I would have walked over some of those hills and climbed some of the trees, swam in that river, the Ovens River, and fished in it. And so I just loved nature. I loved being out in the bush and enjoying it and playing with my friends in the bush. We used to play cowboys and Indians on those hills. Perhaps there were three major things that shaped me as a child. And one was that bushland, that environment that I loved so much was being destroyed. The steep hills were being bulldozed to be planted with exotic monoculture of pine tree, but the hills would be left barren for years on end. They'd be left fallow. And even though as a child I didn't understand ecology, I hadn't studied, you could see something was very, very wrong. The loss of biodiversity and the erosion, the higher temperatures and so on. And at the same time, the main crop in our district was tobacco. And so the rivers that we swam in were being poisoned with DDT. And sometimes there'd be fish kills and great big trout would come floating down the river as we were swimming. They're floating down belly up. So that had a very big impact on me. And then secondly, I used to read and watch the news. And I couldn't understand the adult world that we were growing tobacco in our area while children just like me, who through no fault of their own were born elsewhere and were hungry. This was shocking for me. The third thing that impacted me was my mum's faith, and it gave me a framework for life, that there was more to life than material, having material goods, that we were responsible for those less fortunate than ourselves, and that we had a care of duty for creation care. So these things impacted me very much. But as a child, I think I was angry, but frustrated because I was powerless. And I simply threw up a child's prayer asking God, somehow, somewhere, use me to make a difference. And my connection with your group, with the Saskatoon, as friends of Saskatoon Afforestation areas, my connection is this man, Richard St. Barbie Baker. And one day, my dad was visiting, he sold machinery, he was visiting one of his friends on the farm. It was off season, so his tobacco shed was empty, but in the middle of the shed, he unceremoniously dumped a whole load of old library books. He'd gone to a clearing sale. And it was as if two of Barbara's books jumped out at me. I Planted Trees and Sahara Conquest. And this was a real revelation for me as I realized that not all adults were hell-bent on destroying the earth and just living to make a profit, that there were people out there who were making a difference. And I think Richard was a shining example to me for what could be done. I studied agriculture at university, and that's where I met my lovely wife. Companion, my partner in crime, as we've traveled around the world trying to promote reforestation methods. I get all the credit and the awards and so on, but Liz has made her own unique contributions to the work. So I just wanted to take a minute there to acknowledge her wonderful contribution. We joined a mission organization serving in mission and were assigned to Niger Republic in West Africa. So this is a landlocked country, a borderland of the Sahara Desert, and one of the poorest countries in the world. The landscape that confronted me when we got there shocked me. And remember, we're fresh graduates, barely any experience whatsoever, certainly none in Africa, and just our textbook knowledge of what we thought we should do. But this was a landscape which, while I was growing up in Australia, this had been a biodiverse natural landscape with wildlife and trees and relatively fertile soil, that it supported the communities that lived there. In a very brief few decades, it had been reduced to the point of collapse, barely able to support life. And it was a combination of increased clearing of trees as the population grew. There was demand for farmland, and with poverty, people's one of the few means of making money was by cutting trees and selling fuel wood to the growing cities. In addition, and we weren't aware of this at the time, climate change was coming into effect. And it turns out over the last 30 years, there's been a 25% step down in average rainfall. So that was also a contributing factor, but we didn't know it at that time. The consequences of climate and deforestation were absolutely devastating for the people and for the environment. So there was an increased severity and frequency of droughts. The loss of trees meant the loss of biodiversity, those normal checks and balances, the insect-eating birds and spiders and little mammals that would keep the insect pest population down. And so in the years that we did get good rains, there was still no guarantee of a good crop. And you can see there the dead cow. Even in a normal year, the normal rainfall pattern is to only have 4 months of rain, 4-month rainy season and an 8-month dry season. If you add drought to that normal pattern, it's absolutely devastating. So people suffered, and we ourselves were involved in famine relief on 5 separate occasions. It was a burden to everybody, but in particular, it was very, very difficult for women. They had to walk further to collect fuel wood. Water tables dropped, and many wells were already 60 to 100 meters deep. And in many cases, they simply didn't have water. They had to walk to neighboring villages to draw their water. And so hunger was becoming more severe and more frequent. and the lives of women and children was particularly difficult. Enter Mr. Tony. And here I thought, wow, I've got to make my mark. And if deforestation was one of the major root causes of all these problems, then the solution is simple. We just need to get trees out there. And I did everything in my power. I consulted the experts. I experimented with different approaches, exotic species, indigenous species, planting before the rains with a little bit of irrigation and so on. But nothing worked in a sustainable, economically viable or satisfying way. It was a total failure, actually. Probably 80 to 90% of those trees perished. And to add injury to insult, the people didn't really understand. They thought, who's this crazy white guy? They called me the crazy white farmer. Who in their right mind would plant trees on their valuable farmland when they're struggling to put food on the table? And so I guess I can sympathize with them. In their minds, I was asking them to give up valuable land. But, you know, I was a young man then. I was ambitious to make an impact and totally failing. And I could have easily given up and gone home at that stage. It just seemed to be a hopeless waste of time and money. And one particularly dreary day, I was just down and out this day, thinking hopeless, useless. And I was delivering a load of trees to the villagers, knowing full well most of them would die. And in this photo, I'm reducing the air pressure in the tires. The roads are very sandy, and if you don't reduce the air pressure, you'll get bogged in that sand. So I was reducing the air pressure. And when I stood up, I looked in every direction, north, south, east, west, barely a tree in sight. I thought, how many $1 million would you need? How many decades would it take? How many hundred staff to make an impact on this barren landscape? And I knew the answer. It wasn't going to happen. And I just, it was one of those points of desperation, I guess. Again, I threw up my hands and just asked God to forgive us for destroying the gift of his creation. And as a consequence of which, people were suffering. They were hungry, they were poor, they were fearful because they didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But I just asked for help. I asked that our eyes be opened and that we would know what to do to solve that situation. I felt there must be a solution. And the strange thing is, I'd actually been driving on this road at this stage for 2.5 years, almost every week. My eyes were open, but I was totally blind to what had been all around us the whole time. And the little bush there in the circle, there are actually millions of these, what seem to be bushes. Maybe they were agricultural weeds. I'd never taken the trouble to have a closer look. But on this particular day, I walked over and took a closer look. And immediately when you see the shape of the leaf, the leaf is like a signature. It tells you what species that tree or bush is. And I knew, even though there weren't many trees left, I knew my species. And in that instant, everything changed. It's not a bush. It's not a weed. It's a tree. It's been cut down and it's trying to resprout, trying to grow back into a tree. But the normal farming practice was to be a so-called clean farmer. And they would slash this regrowth and burn it using the ash as fertilizer. In that instant, everything changed and the battle lines were redrawn. I wasn't fighting the Sahara Desert. It wasn't a question of a multi-million-dollar budget or a miracle species of tree. It was about mindset change. And if beliefs are at the root of all human behavior, that was the new battle line. And tackling false beliefs about trees and the value of trees, negative attitudes about having trees on your farmland, and destructive practices, that they were the new battle lines. And if I could convince farmers that it was in their interest that they would create a better future for themselves and their children by allowing some of these trees to regrow, then because everything you need is literally at your feet. These tree stumps are at your feet. Then the rest would be relatively easy. And so, over the years, people have given me different titles, the forest maker, the tree whisperer, and so on. But I surprise them when I say, actually, 95% of my time I spend regreening mindscapes. And if I win that battle between the ears, the rest is relatively easy, because nature wants to heal itself. It's able to heal itself if we'd only give it a chance. And what's happening? Why aren't these bushes regrowing? They're being slashed, burnt, grazed, plowed over. It's never given a chance to regrow. And I compare it to a V8 engine. I'll come back to that. I call it the underground forest, because when you cut a tree down, for most species, not all, some trees will die when you cut them, but for most species, they're not dead. And 30 to 50% of the biomass of the tree is still alive. It has an extensive root system with access to deep moisture, nutrients, and stored sugars. And they have the capacity to grow very, very quickly, even in these dry climates. Now, what was that last point? I shouldn't have skipped it. I'll probably remember it later on. But it has this enormous potential. I like to compare it to having a V8 engine. The engine switched on, but the gear's in neutral. And so it's idling away, very, very powerful, but moving nowhere until you put it in gear. And that putting it in gear is the take away the constraints, alter how you manage livestock, fire, ploughing, and biomass, harvest of biomass. So the method came to be called Farmer Managed Natural Regeneration, or FMNR. And it's actually nothing new. It's coppicing is a technical term, and it's been practiced for centuries in various parts of the world, including Africa. But for one reason or another, farmers have gotten out of the practice of leaving some trees on their agricultural land. It's very, very simple. We select the stumps that we want to regrow into trees. When you cut a tree down, there'll be a profusion of stems, maybe 20 or 30 stems growing from the one stump. So we need to prune back and select just anything from 1 to 5 stems. So you're reducing competition, and you select the very healthiest, most robust stems that will grow straight and fast. And then from time to time you come back, because little side shoots, little suckers will come back. You need to cut them out and keep favoring the selected growth that you want, and minimizing all that excess growth that's just going to compete with what you want. And the impact in Niger was astounding. It was beyond my wildest dreams. Over the following 20 years, average farm tree density increased from less than 4 trees per hectare. And you can see on this satellite image, many, many areas have no trees whatsoever. So less than 4 trees per hectare to over 40, with some farmers leaving even in excess of 100 trees and still growing a decent crop, plus having the additional benefits of those trees: fuel wood, timber, wild foods, traditional medicines, fodder for livestock, improved microclimate. Some of the trees all of the trees were fertilizing the soil with badly needed organic matter, and some of the trees were nitrogen fixing, so actually adding nitrogen to the soil, and so on. So many benefits started to accrue, and this spread over a 20-year period to 5 million hectares, equating to roughly, I want to get the figure right, 200 million trees without planting a single tree. So in this particular case, it is farmland. We're not creating a national park. People still need to eat, still need to make a living, but it's a vast improvement on what they were doing previously. And over the years, we've had the opportunity in various countries to apply the same principles on pastoral land and on forests. So we have the opportunity to recreate natural biodiverse forests with all the wildlife and bird benefits that come as the trees return. So what's been the impact on the livelihood of the people? Those 200 million trees have altered the microclimate, improved the soil fertility, and enabled farmers to diversify their agricultural enterprises. And so each household involved in this is earning an additional $1,000 in gross income. In other words, the value of what they consume plus the surplus that they sell is in excess of $1,000 per household across the 5 million hectares. 4.5 million people are earning around $900 million per year, every year, without ongoing subsidy or government or non-government organization input or cajoling or any kind of inducement. People are doing it because it pays. Their crop yields have improved. Nigerian farmers are growing an additional 500,000 tons of grain every year, not through fertilizers or irrigation or improved seed. In some places you can add them on. It's just by virtue of the fact that they are now working with nature instead of fighting against it. That food is enough to feed 2.5 million people. And I've put that little pause button there because those are all big numbers. And if you're like me, they tend to roll over your heads. You know, what's the context? What's the meaning? This occurred on the edge of the Sahara Desert in a very, very harsh environment. It occurred with minimal external or government support or expertise or money. This movement was a movement run by the farmers themselves. It was a farmers' movement. And when you think about that, Nigerian farmers are amongst the poorest people in the world. They're naturally risk averse. If this thing fails, they've got the most to lose. So they're only going to do it if it's really to their benefit. And it just spread across the country at a rate. If you do the sums on that 5 million hectares over 20 years, it's spread at a rate of 250,000 hectares per year for 20 years, largely without my knowledge. And I've had the privilege of returning to Niger. The most recent trip was just before the pandemic in 2019. And I was just thrilled that many, many farmers continue this practice to this day. And in addition, they've built on that foundation. Once you get a certain tree cover and you alter the microclimate and the soil fertility, you begin to be able to add other farm enterprises, beekeeping, livestock fattening, alternative crops. And so, yes, in Niger, droughts still come, pest attacks still occur, but the vulnerability of the farmers has greatly decreased because they have more options. Maybe you lose your millet crop, but your sweet potato or cassava crop will plow through. Maybe you lose, maybe one of the other crops doesn't do so well, but your livestock has access to fodder from the trees and so on. And so just a few shots there. Crop yield increased, in some cases doubled, by virtue of having the trees in place. People had new enterprises such as beekeeping, because many of these trees are flowering. Some of the wild trees have been top grafted with improved cultivars. This one's called Apple of the Sahel. And the wild food is very, very small. It's like your small fingernail, just tiny. It's very nice, but it's considered children's food. This is not just a food, it's a cash crop for the farmers that produces even in drought years. So my wife and I spent 17 years in Niger, and towards the end, I received some visitors, and actually I think they were Canadian, and they wanted to see the project. So we drove out to one of the villages. And I think I was feeling a little bit sentimental. 17 years is a big chunk of your life. And I was wondering, what on earth am I going to do back in Australia? I've had such a wonderful experience here. But we sat down, before we went out to see the trees, we sat down. And in Africa, when you do that, it always attracts a crowd. And the villagers started to come round, and not sure what got into me, but I asked them, of all the different activities that our project did, the tree work, the fuel efficient stoves, the alternative crops, digging wells where people had no water and so on, of all these different things, what's had the most significant impact on your life? And somebody stepped up and he said, Marlum Tony, Mr. Tony, none of these. And you can imagine I was a little bit shattered. What? I wasted 17 years of my life. He said, none of these. Before this project, we were nobody. We were nothing. All that we saw of our district chief was the dust from his Land Rover when he sped through our village. The only time we ever saw the forestry department was when they came to fine us for chopping down the trees. And on a global setting, nobody knew about us. We could listen to the BBC, but they knew nothing of us. But today, because of this project, the village chief comes to us for counsel. The forestry department takes us all across the nation as an example of how to restore their land and their forests. And look at this today, people from Canada, last week someone from Australia, the other month someone from the US. We're known, we're appreciated. And, I was trying to analyze, what are they saying? What are they saying? Because in so many projects, the emphasis is on, get the trees in, increase the yield, whatever the measure is, it's always some kind of technical measure. No, they were saying, we have our dignity, our self-worth. You've brought meaning back into our life. And, that really, really touched me. It was so powerful. And so in 1999, we returned to Australia and I joined World Vision. It's a Christian relief and development organization that focuses on needy children in roughly 100 countries around the world. And I thought, wonderful, the world's my oyster, because nearly every country in the world is impacted by deforestation to one degree or another. And if you address this foundational issue, then you alleviate poverty, you address food insecurity, you help children. And so I've just had the most wonderful time traveling to many, many countries trying to introduce this approach. And I often think, and I actually got this expression from a farmer in Tanzania. And when I visited him in the field, he grabbed me by the hand and took me to the edge of the farm. And he said, this tree used to be my enemy. And you could see it had been cut down and it was bowl-shaped on the top because every year he lit a fire on top of it, literally trying to decimate it, trying to get rid of this tree. And he said, then I learned about FMNR and the benefits of having trees on your land. And now I feel so ashamed that I ever tried to destroy it. This tree has become my friend. So I've become this kind of global campaigner, turning enemies of trees, enemies of nature, into friends of trees, and had the wonderful opportunity to see these benefits multiplied in many, many countries. Water returning, springs that are drying up, waterfalls, wells returning, places where lives have been lost because of landslips. Now the community living without fear. Crop yields increased, biodiversity coming back. It's just been such a wonderful experience, and I feel privileged to be able to do this. One of my favorite projects, and I have many, but one of my favorites is in southern Ethiopia. And you can see the state of that bare hill there. And this is one of the areas where I mentioned we have the opportunity to use the principles to restore biodiverse natural forests. And over the years, particularly during the socialist years, when people were very, very poor, there was a lot of hunger, their land was redistributed many times, and they'd lost their traditional access rights to their own forest. But in desperation to keep their families alive, they cut down their own forest. And then in subsequent years, suffered the consequences. And World Vision actually moved into this region. Again, it was 1984. That same drought famine year that affected us in West Africa actually occurred across the Sahel from Senegal to Somalia. And World Vision moved in. They did wonderful work saving lives with food relief. We moved into a recovery period following the famine and then a development period. However, for the next 20 years, to one degree or another, we were still obliged to provide some degree of food aid. And the issue was, despite wonderful help in education, health, micro-enterprise development, agriculture, despite all of the good work, we had failed to address that underlying environmental issue, the deforestation and degradation of the landscape. And so we had the opportunity to restore this forest with and through the community in 2006, and using FMNR, so no tree planting on that hill. Within just 6 years of restoring the forest, this historically food aid dependent community sold 106 tons of grain to the World Food Programme. I was stoked, I was thrilled, but I was also a little bit, I said, how's that work? This isn't even your agricultural land. How do you have a surplus? And they said, well, as soon as the vegetation cover returned to the hills, in the wet years, the flooding stopped. We stopped losing our crops, and that gave us the confidence. It removed the risk, gave us the confidence to invest in improved agriculture, and our crop yields increased. And in a drought year, yes, we received less rain than average, but what we observe is when the clouds hit our hill, they're more likely to drop their rain on us than on our neighbours. And yes, it's less rain, but because of lower temperatures, lower wind speed, less evaporation and more organic matter holding that moisture, that little bit of rain is more effective. And then in addition, there's all the other things that we get less grain, but we've got more fodder to feed our animals. We can sell fuel wood to supplement our incomes, and honey and so on. So it's very, very powerful transformation. And it's just powerful. You know, I love going back and seeing the green, but actually the biggest transformation that I see is invisible. And I call it the restoration of hope. And if you could put yourself in their shoes, what's it like to be a parent? You can't even clothe your children or feed them adequately or send them to school. It's debilitating, it's soul destroying. And then here's this simple method, costs nothing, just your own effort, automatically overnight becomes within your power to create the future that you want for yourself and your children. And it's just, you can see the reaction on people's faces there. They're just thrilled. And when we go back, it's like, is World Vision really paying me? These guys are in party mode. There's clapping and singing and dancing because they want to celebrate what's happened. And so where am I at today? And I think, well, in 40, how many years? Yeah, nearly 40 years, nobody's ever grabbed Tony by the collar and said, Tony, you ruined my farm, you ruined my life. Only thankfulness, only praise and acknowledgement of the benefits of restoring their landscape with this approach. And I think about an old saying, an old adage: if you have nothing to lose and everything to gain, by all means, go for it. Give it all you've got. Don't hold back. And I feel that way with FMNR. It's a no regrets technology. There's no downside. And if it worked in one of the most inhospitable places on earth, in the Sahel, then it could work almost anywhere. And so I've pulled out all the stops, and my goal, with and through others, you can't do this alone, with and through others, is to see 1 billion hectares of degraded land restored worldwide. And what point in history are we at the moment? It's really quite frightening. It's very pivotal. And you've experienced this in Canada with extreme heat waves and fires and probably floods as well. And we've experienced the same in Australia and other parts of the world. We're going to see more and more of these extreme weather events, more drought, more flooding, more storms. And this has an impact on the poorest people of the world, as well as us, but particularly on the poorest people in the world. So there'll be more conflict over scarce resources and more migration in desperation to find somewhere where they can live and bring up their family. But I didn't want to finish off on a negative note. It's also this incredible opportunity to do something. And while, yes, we have to do everything in our power to stop greenhouse gas emissions, I don't deny that. We must do that. At the same time, there are in the order of 3 billion hectares of degraded land worldwide. And some of that will be suitable for reforestation, some for agroforestry, where it's a mix of crops and trees, and some for silvopastoralism, where you've got a mix of trees and pasture land for livestock. And if you restore even 1 billion hectares of that degraded land, it has the potential to draw down somewhere between 20 and 25% of the existing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So it's not going to solve the problems, but it's going to make a very, very significant dent. And I like this little play on numbers. We need this kind of mathematics, God's mathematics, where 1 + 1 no longer equals 2, 1 + 1 equals 11. And a little effort is multiplied many times over as more and more people get on with this. And what I learned in the field, I started in just 10 or 12 villages, and I saw that it worked. And then with an incremental increase in effort, I saw this exponential increase in impact. And before long, during the famine, we reached 100 villages. Over the next 20 years, it spread to 50% of the farmland in Niger. Then I joined World Vision, and I thought, well, I wonder if we notch it up a little bit and see what happens. And we started having, first of all, face-to-face community level workshops, and then national and then international conferences. And today, this approach is being implemented in around 27 countries. And so incremental increase in effort, exponential increase in impact. So that's what that 1 + 1 = 11 is about. So thank you for your attention. I can't see the clock here, so I hope I haven't gone over time. And yeah, welcome questions. Thank you. So should I stop sharing, Julia?
Thank you, Tony. No, leave your screen on because it gives the people contacts for how to reach you, and that doesn't hurt to have that on the screen while people are asking questions and so forth. But that's just amazing. It just blows me away, the impact that you had with the FMNR. Like, I was always focusing on the actual what you were doing with the land, and I didn't really fathom the effect that it had on the actual spirit of the people, and that is actually quite phenomenal.
Thank you. It blew me away as well. Of course, it makes sense.
Yeah.
But you know, I think it's our Western minds. We're so focused on ABC. These are our goals. Go get them. Mm-hmm. We're working with people here. This is the most important thing. And the environment is one of those side benefits. Yeah, the environment benefits too. Yeah.
Cool. Does anyone else have a question that's here that they'd like to bring forward?
I have a question.
Sure.
I've been interested, well, first of all, here in Western Canada, we have vast acres of land that was put to the plow that never should have been. And that is those are the lands that blew away during the droughty 30s. But my question has to do with one of your countrymen, Bill Mollison. Have you ever met this guy, or do you know him about him at all? He's permaculture.
I did. Yeah, I did meet Bill. Yeah.
And because in a way, your ideas and approach kind of could partner very nicely with his in his methodology of living with the land and working with nature, not against it. What was your take on Bill and some of his ideas?
Oh no, I'm fully supportive. I've done permaculture training, and I guess when I developed this, I wasn't so aware of permaculture. But you're absolutely right. It's the same principles of working with nature instead of trying to force it to be and do what it's not meant to. And so it's very much in alignment. And from time to time, I have the opportunity to work with permaculturalists, to encourage them to include this in their suite of activities that they promote. And there's no competition there. We're all on the same side.
Yeah.
Bill famously said, the solutions to the world's increasingly complex problems are embarrassingly simple. And I love that. FMNR is embarrassingly simple, but I'm not ashamed because it works.
Right. Yeah, I'm active in the local Saskatoon permaculture group, and I've been involved in some small projects. But I've read some of Bill Mollison's books, and I'm a big fan.
Wonderful. My whole yard, I don't have a farm, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, because that frees me up to go global. But my whole yard, it harvests water, it composts, it's got mix of fruit trees, wild trees, veggies, flowers, you name it. It's loosely based on permacultural principles.
That is pretty cool. When you showed some of the pictures of the trees coming back through the FMNR method, and then you were talking about beekeeping and other kinds of benefits of this, did they also plant their vegetables and their crops in amongst the trees too, like almost like agroforestry kind of idea?
Yes, yeah. And it's unfortunately I've taken some slides out. It's always a hard choice. What will I focus on? But it was very, very advantageous. And what I didn't show, I have a beautiful picture of a crop taken in a drought year. And it's not just surviving, it's thriving the closer you get to the base of the tree. And it's been decimated away from the tree, and that's counterintuitive. At the time, we thought, well, it's cooler there, there's more organic matter, maybe a little bit more moisture, there's predators in the tree eating the insect pests, so it makes sense. What we didn't realize was these trees, many of these species are actually bio-irrigating the crop, and they're drawing deep water in the soil profile through their taproot, and at nighttime they leak through their shallow roots within reach of the crop's roots. So they're irrigating the crop for free. And then I mentioned briefly, there's some trees that are putting nitrogen in the soil. You saw that sand. It's not your rich prairie soil, it's like crushed glass. So the organic matter, the nitrogen you're putting in, it was actually up to doubling the crop yield. So in that particular context, yes, it was agroforestry.
That is so awesome. I have another question for you. So you mentioned there was a sort of a cultural shift in the mind thinking that had to go on, and your marketing or your campaign didn't really push the idea of FMNR as much as the belief system of the people and them needing to have trees and working in harmony with nature. We're kind of facing maybe the same thing here, because when we had the drought in the dirty 30s, people realized that it turned around a bit with shelter belts. But now that the PFRA is closed down and there's not a big push for shelter belts, the University of Saskatchewan reported how many shelter belts have been taken out by farmers wishing to make their farming land larger. And now we've had 4 years of drought, maybe going into the 5th year. How do you go about fixing that belief system? That sounds like even harder than trying to get people to believe in FMNR, trying to get people to change their beliefs. So how do you do that?
Well, there's a lot of footwork, because you can't do it remotely. You need to have connection with the people. They trust you, they believe what you're saying. And I still get to do that, but mostly I do it through others now. I've trained many people living in these countries. But the key question that I ask is, if we continue business as usual, where does that lead us? What environment will our children and children's children inherit? Will they even be able to stay on this land? And I don't know about Saskatoon, but in Africa, even though many people haven't been to school, they're not silly, and they can draw the dots very quickly. I'm not surviving now. Little water, variable food supply, no fuel wood. How could it get worse? You know, and I've asked this question, and in Uganda, somebody said it will become hell on earth, and he wasn't joking. And in Ghana, they said, we will have to leave everything we know and love, our ancestral land, and go to the capital city. And in Lesotho, you know, most of the young men go to South Africa for work. They said, we'll become cannibals, because already the crime rate was over the top. And while, you know, I think he wouldn't have been completely serious. He was saying, you know, what's the next worst step? People become so desperate they become cannibals. So it's a very, very frightening question. And if you think about it there, do you really want to return to, I don't know if it's 1930s or 1940s Dust Bowl? What's the future in that? And so I'm not giving people the answer. I'm making them think through the logical outworkings of business as usual, and let them come up with the answer themselves. And then you're in a powerful position to say, okay, what are we going to do about it? No sensible parent wants their children to experience worse conditions than the ones we're suffering from already.
Cool. I asked a hard question. That was an excellent answer. Thank you.
Thank you. It's not easy. But it's not impossible, and it takes time and commitment. But the more that you stick to it, the more the momentum grows. And what took over a decade in Niger, now in some countries is taking as little as 1 to 2 years. So, yeah, don't give up. Persevere. You'll get there.
I really enjoyed your presentation, Tony. Robert here, and I was wondering. So, is this? Are you the main promoter through World Vision, or are agencies, the United Nations, or other organizations taking up this cause?
Definitely. So, up until 2012, the method was barely known, barely acknowledged. Despite what happened in Niger, and people was making all kinds of comments. Well, the climate's changed, or they were attributing this phenomenon to all sorts of things. But a lot of research has been done, and a lot of effort in these international conferences that we've held. And just in the last few years, the method's been acknowledged by the Food and Agriculture Organization, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, World Vision, because of this work, is an acknowledged contributor to the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, through our projects and those of our partners, many other non-government organizations, and more governments themselves are implementing this approach. So the situation has turned very quickly, but even so, if you look at any reports on global efforts to restore trees, and I'll just put in a little proviso here. I'm not against tree planting. It's part of the mix. So don't read me wrong. If you listen to any of these reports, there are countries boasting of how many million or even billion trees they planted in a single day. There's no follow-up. How many of those survived? What did it cost? What was the suitability of those trees? And so countries are tripping over each other, trying to break records without thinking of the long-term benefits of these I call them one-night stands, and literally millions and millions of dollars are going into tree planting. A lot of those, unfortunately, will have minimal success. So there's still much to be done in terms of awareness creation and mobilization of people to at least consider this and include it in the mix of approaches that we use in land restoration.
Thank you. So you mentioned St. Barb. So your reading his book was sort of like turned your thinking around in terms of, here's someone that claiming and showing that there can be restoration. Is that really the turning, was that the main?
Well, it was an inspiration that there was somebody out there actually doing something. And as you know, he did it on the smell of an oily rag. He self-funded. He wrote books to get on to the next city or the next ship. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. And then I probably wasn't so aware of it at the time, but in reflection, the way he related to Indigenous people at a time when there was this colonial attitude that we know best. And the British Empire went in there and extracted people's natural resources with no thought for the future. And he opposed that and lost his job before it. Just his principles had a big impact on my thinking. And then ironically, this wasn't planned. Ironically, when he did that Sahara conquest, and I thought, wow, he's picked on the mother of all challenges, restore the Sahara. Where he came out at the other end of the Sahara was Niger Republic. So I think subconsciously he really worked on me.
Thank you.
Yeah, I must admit that when I heard that Richard St. Barbe Baker was tackling the Sahara Desert, I figured in my head, nobody can do that. And now people are. And here you are. You had a very sandy condition in Africa where you arrived and you took it on as well. So yeah, it's amazing what can be done. It's mind-blowing, actually.
Yes, and I didn't actually work in the Sahara. I was south of the Sahara, but in subsequent years, I've been to hyper-arid areas in the rural parts of Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Jordan, receiving just 2 to 4 inches of rain. And in some of these places, I see tree stumps. It's very cold at night. People still need fuel wood. They've got umpteen camels chewing away at these things. But there's trees there. And so I've come to a new appreciation of even the Sahara. Maybe not all of it. There's certainly true treeless desert. But I'm convinced now, and when you look at history and the ancient civilizations, the cities that existed in remote what's now desert places, these aren't true deserts in the sense of lifeless wastes. These are altered landscapes. And my rule of thumb is, if a forest existed there before, even in the distant past, theoretically at least, there's the potential to have a forest there today and in the future.
I can see why you gave hope to all those people there that were facing starvation and different problems. You are very inspirational.
Thank you. I feel blessed. Accidental hero.
I also find it very interesting in a way that you and St. Barb had sort of similar motivations, because St. Barb came from a family of pastors before he became a silviculturist, and then you went through the that Christian Foundation, and I'm not seeing the name on the screen, so I'm not going to get the title of it all right. So it's kind of interesting that you both had a very wonderful way of inspiring people through a good belief system and faith and hope and everything.
Thank you. And it makes sense in this worldview, my worldview, I guess, that who created the world, if there was a creator, what got into his head that he created such a beautiful, diverse, integrated world? And, you know, in the scriptures, it talks about there being joy and rejoicing and great happiness in heaven at the time of creation. What does God feel like now as he sees this gift to humanity being trashed? He must be heartbroken. And I firmly believe, yes, God does do miracles, but primarily he works through people. And so as a Christian, I see it as a strong responsibility to do something about it, not just stand by and say, well, it's beyond my power. There's this responsibility on all of us to do something we may not get back to the Garden of Eden, but yeah, let's approximate that to the best of our ability.
So on the screen earlier, you had a world map, and it looked like there was different types of zones for either desert or very good potential for growing crops. Does that mean that the FMNR, yeah, this one, does that mean that, yeah.
This one or the previous?
The one with arrows on it. Yeah, that one. Does that mean that's where you're moving into, like these kinds of desert areas with the FMNR idea?
So these are places where I've held workshops or conferences. And I must say, it's not me alone. Yes, I'm one of the key promoters, but there's whole teams of people and other organizations. So, yeah. But these are places where there's been interest, perhaps the community where World Vision's working, they've suffered drought or flooding or the consequences of extreme shortages of fuel wood and so on. And so that's created an opening. Please come and help us. Now, the principles work across from mangroves to alpine areas, from hyper-arid to humid, subtropical and tropical. The principles work across the board, but if I look at where's it being adopted the most strongly, it tends to be in the drier regions, the Sahel in Africa. And I see two principal reasons for that. One is there are a few other options. You can't plant a high value, say, fruit tree, a mango tree, without irrigation. And there's a high likelihood that tree will die anyway. But this is low cost, it's fast, it's doable. And so I'm not going to have a high value crop or horticultural crop option. Let's do this and work with it. The other thing is in African countries, the primary source of cooking fuel and heating the home and so on, even lighting, is still wood. That's not necessarily the case in many Asian and Latin American countries. There's still this desperate, this terrible deforestation going on, but people have other means of cooking and so on. So I start in these areas where people are more receptive, but I'm chipping away. There's still this overriding environmental problem, the flooding, the loss of soil fertility, biodiversity, and so on. It's still worth you doing this, even if it's not primarily driven by economics and survival.
Right? Cool. we're starting to have wood crisis in North America a little bit. Maybe not to the desert level yet, but it's very close to being on the horizon because we've had insect infestation in our sort of the lush forested areas on our coastlines, followed by forest fires and then forest fires, and the same thing, pestilence in our northern boreal forests. And yeah, when you lose millions of acres to forest fires, and the lumber companies keep following this, and it's just people are desperately, that are environmentalists, are trying to grasp onto the last bit of forest before the lumber companies take them down, because where they used to harvest is now devastated by the forest fire, and they got to wait for it to rejuvenate. So yeah, we're not doing very well right now in a lot of ways for the long-term picture. So yeah, it's kind of neat that something that works in the desert might work here too, kind of thing.
Yes, I'm sure that's some adaptation of this, because you've got a whole different economic structure and so on, and different environment and species, but some adaptation of this would definitely work. But isn't it shocking? People often think, well, how do you convince farmers in the third world to do this, thinking that there's some kind of special case that resists change. Mm-hmm. And yet here we are, amongst developed countries, Australia has the highest deforestation rate in the world. Educated, wealthy, should know better. We had our own version of the Dust Bowl, and yet repeating the same mistakes. And so we're not immune in the West to stupidity, and the need for re-education, for advocacy, for, shaking people. You're destroying everybody's futures, not just mine, but your own and your children's. Please reconsider. One of my photos that I also took out, I've got, there's a freeway close to my place, and there's this giant sign, wrong way, turn back. And I often plonk that in the middle of my slideshow. We're on the wrong way. Immediately turn back. There's an accident ahead. But what does it take? You had those fires, it was hotter in Western Canada than in Central Australia, for goodness sakes. What does it need to convince people that we're on the wrong path?
Mm-hmm. That's for sure. Yeah. Well, I'm sure glad that you're doing the work that you're doing. It's sure enlightening and wonderful to hear. I got goosebumps. It's just awesome. Yeah.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to speak to the group, and I encourage you. Don't give up. It's a hard battle, but it's not impossible. Just keep chipping away at it. You got to win someday, and even if you don't, it's better than lying in bed and waiting for climate change to catch you there. Do something.
Yeah, or for someone else to do it. A lot of people say they know the problem, and then they wait for someone else or the government or somebody else to do something. And sometimes it's like how you said, 1 + 1 is 11. So that's a really good analogy.
Yeah, go for it. Give it all you got.
Right. So I'm not sure. I'm not hearing any other questions come forward. Perhaps some people are signed into the webinar without a microphone or something, but I should check the chat how it's coming along.
Maybe just ask Tony. Sorry, I was just going to ask. I spent a year in Australia back in 72, 73, and I just wonder. You mentioned about deforestation. And of course, there are large areas of Australia which are considered desert. I mean, Nil Arbor Plain. How applicable is this in Australia?
So I don't know about the Nullarbor Plain itself. I don't think what's happened there is so much forests have been cut down as at times overgrazing and a degradation of the soil and a loss of the biodiversity, which was probably more a shrub prairie type setting. But vast areas of our agricultural and grazing land were cleared. The adage of the early settlers, and maybe it was the same in Canada, was if it moves, shoot it. If it doesn't, chop it down. It's just terrible. And in fact, the settlers in the colonial era, you were not allowed to keep land that had been allotted to you until you cleared it. Then you could get a proper title. Yeah. And there was this sentiment, we're civilizing, we're taming the useless bush. So across vast areas, there's potential for some adaptation of FMNR. I'd like to put it under the umbrella of regenerative agriculture. And maybe farmers here won't do it for the same reasons as farmers in Africa, where fuel wood is an economic proposition. You can sell it anywhere. And some of those trees have wild fruits and medicine and so on. There's probably not too many native trees here that would bring an economic return that would cover your wages. But I could put in a very, very strong argument for protecting the catchment and reducing flooding. You know, we just had parts of Brisbane, a capital city, underwater right up to the roof. And all that topsoil washed out of good farmland. There's definitely economic rationale for applying these principles across vast areas of Australia.
Good, thank you.
Maybe my accent stifled the others.
I don't think so. I think it's wonderful. But
it's more understandable than a lot of Australians.
Yes. But
I've almost lived outside of Australia more than inside, so I think I've got multiple accents molded into one.
Yeah.
But what you said about agriculture historically in Australia, it just echoed what we had to do here, like clear the land before you could do the homestead or before you could prove up on the land. And it's just amazing the echo of how similar it was and how it still is. So it's just bizarre. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's exactly the same. This is a mindscapes battle. And, you know, our emphasis, and you read anything on reforestation and even fighting climate change, it's reduced to technical and financial issue. Throw billions at it, plant billions of trees. I don't think that will stop climate change if our behavior doesn't change. And this idea of turning enemies of nature, and that's what we are, our pollution, our waste, our destruction of ecosystems and biodiversity. We're enemies of nature. And until we change that mindset, throw all the money you like at it, we won't make much progress.
Yes, I agree. I quite often read about the old homesteaders, and it was amazing. Like nowadays, we put 8-foot high fences up around gardens to keep deers and other animals out of our precious vegetable gardens. But back in the old days, the farmer would plant his crop, the vegetable garden that he wanted for himself, and then he would plant another row on the outside for the deers. And it was almost like the deers knew that that's the one they could have, and they left the other ones alone. It was just an amazing solution, and it worked so well for the farmers that tried that. It was just a unique solution that you didn't need these 8-foot high fences as much. You could just do, this is yours, this is mine, and we'll continue. So they didn't have scarcity.
That's amazing. I love that story. Another one of my heroes is still alive, Alan Savory. He developed a system of grazing called holistic grazing management. And some of our farmers, pastoralists in Kenya, I'm trying to think of their name, Masai. So again, they used to be enemies of the environment in a sense, but they introduced this method of grazing, and it's as if there's this mutual respect where the animals know where they're meant to graze, and the herders know where they should, when and where they should graze their animals. And what had been often been a wildlife human conflict setting, they're now living in more or less harmony. And some of the Maasai are even making extra money from tourists walking with the baboons. So you go on these eco walks and get relatively close to baboons, watching their behavior. So yeah, it's possible to live in relative harmony with nature.
right? I'm going to have to look that up too. And I did order your book. I think it looks very interesting. So I can hardly wait for it to come. And yeah, and I really appreciate you coming to do the webinar. That's really very special. Is it okay if we put it online to share with people also?
Please do. Thank you. And it's been a great pleasure to meet with everybody and to share. And you're also an encouragement to me. It's groups like yours that are making a difference. So keep it up.
Well, thank you. You provided a good guiding light. I know I myself started with Richard St. Barbe Baker and learning from Robert White and Paul Hanley. And then last year I met you, and now I've got to meet you even further. So this is very special to me.
Thank you. Have a wonderful evening, and a wonderful evening.
And you too. Yeah, you're probably going into the noon hour, so I hope you have a good lunch. I can't believe how far apart our time zones are. But yes, have a great day.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Thank you,
Cool. So.
Thank you, Julia.
And thank you, Robert, for coming. Yeah, okay, there. So I've got it recorded, and I'll try to change the first slides around a little bit when it goes online so that those people were very disruptive. I've never seen that happen before. I don't know why that happened, so we'll have to send an apology to Tony, that's for sure, because that was awkward. I don't even know how you do that, how people write on the screen like that horribly. But yeah, so that's not good. But yeah, but you did good. You've got them into the waiting room, and then it settled down very well after that.
Yeah, well, one person I think came back, he put a different name.
Oh,
and that's
right.
what happened the second time. Like, there was a new name in there, and I thought, well, maybe it's a different person wanting to come.
Yeah, for sure.
And it turned out it was the same.
Yeah.
Same character.
They sounded like they were very youngish, and have just out for a good time, and it just took the wonderfulness away at the beginning. So I'm glad it settled down and we got a very good message out of it. So yeah, very cool. So yeah, thank you everybody for coming, that's for sure. Yeah, we've still got some people signed in here. Yeah. So yeah, have a very good evening, and I'll see if I can get this online. I think it's still recording, so yeah, I should be able to fix it and get it online.
Thank you to Tony Rinaudo Forest Maker for being with us tonight. And thank you for our audience for being here. We wish to apologize for the disruption by malicious people and intruders who were at the meeting for a few minutes at the beginning. We have corrected this, and our webinar posted online presents a safe place to learn about the wonderful works that Tony Rinaudo is doing. The Friends of the Saskatoon Afforestation areas, along with Tony Rinaudo, are excited to let you know that the book, The Forest Underground, Hope for a Planet in Crisis, is now available. And you can find it on our website, friendsareas.ca, or stbarbaker.wordpress.com, or send us an email, friends@afforestation@gmail.com, and we will send you a link for how to order The Forest Underground, Hope for a Planet in Crisis, an amazing and wonderful book. And once again, thank you for being with us tonight. And thank you also to Tony Rinaudo.